Clemson wants out of the ACC, and the Big 12, they're just waiting in the wings.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've got you covered. Plenty of everything coming up on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. So, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. If you're talking Big 12 expansion, we're talking with Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. Of course, at Drake C. Toll on X, formerly known as Twitter. Voice of the party animals, by the way. The opponent, is that what we call it? Of the Savannah Bananas. Sure. Yeah, the opponent, the partner, call it whatever you would like. It's a big thing right now, but so too is Clemson leaving the ACC. Your initial reaction for what this means and what the Big 12 should be doing right now?
Well, first and foremost, Spencer, there'll be some that push back and say, well, what if Clemson doesn't win the lawsuit? What if Clemson is stuck in the ACC? And here's the quote that I would give them from the Tampa Bay Times. Clemson argues the only games subject to the ESPN deal they are currently in their grant of rights involve ACC teams, not games played if and when Clemson is no longer an ACC member. Clemson put in a lawsuit if and when Clemson is no longer an ACC member. The day is coming. Florida State wants out. Clemson wants out. And maybe the most important part of this is the context of timing. The College Football Playoff Board of Directors just told us the Big Ten and the SEC are going to make a whole lot more money than everybody else. If you're Clemson and Florida State, you're seeing the Big 12 is making more money than you per team in a TV deal. And now it's so close in the College Football Playoff revenue distribution that you feel cut out, left out as a power brand in college athletics. Therefore, Clemson wants to go somewhere else.
Isn't the ACC deal an average? I thought it was 36 million.
Yeah, you're sitting about 17% down to 15% of the Big 12, but the ESPN contract itself signed through 2031 for the Big 12 is more per team than 2036's contract in the ACC. So they will make more in the college football playoff.
So the rolling average in the ACC is more. But bottom line, for what people should understand is the money here is comparable at the very least. Like, there's not a huge gap between the Big 12 deal and the ACC deal.
No. And overall, based on what you'll be making in 2036, the Big 12 teams, based on not just college football playoff, but the actual TV deal from ESPN itself, those teams, like a Kansas State, will make more than Clemson. And guess who's not happy about that? Clemson. Now, I don't think they would make this move unless there was a suitor out there, the Big Ten or the SEC, because it's not going to be the Big 12. And the reason there's a suitor is because the College Football Playoff Board of Directors said, hey, in 2028, let's revisit this. And if any of you guys have expanded a bit, maybe we'll toss you some more money. And that is the go for the Big 12, the ACC, the SEC, and the Big Ten to expand as fast as possible with whoever possible, with whatever is profitable. That's why this happened. When it happened, the initial bombshell, it's like, okay, well, now they're actually doing it. I think, to me, that's not shocking. It's the reason they are doing it is because now everyone needs to expand by 2028 to get that pay bump in the look-in. And more than anything, Clemson can't make less than Kansas State in 2036. They're tired of making so much less than the Big Ten and the SEC.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a driver, but I think the credibility or pedigree component is arguably as big of a factor. You look at what happened to Florida State this past year. Can that happen in the 12s or 14 or, once we get to a 64-team playoff? No, of course. That cannot happen. I'm only half being facetious there. I have no idea when playoff expansion is going to stop, because why would it? There's more money to be made. Anyway, so I think that for Clemson, they feel to me more like the SEC.
Yeah.
Florida State, I think, can fit in either of these two conferences, the SEC or the Big Ten. Clemson feels more SEC to me. The interesting thing, though, Drake, is neither of these conferences are in a position of need.
Right.
Like, I don't look at either league and the realignment moves and how everything is shuffled and the teams and the brands that were already there. And from a financial, pedigree, television rating standpoint, neither one of these conferences needs Florida State and Clemson. They just might end up wanting them. But I don't think these schools are going to go their separate ways. I think they probably move together. And it's just a question of, do you think it's more a question of which league wants them more or which league they want more?
I think it's which league wants them more, and maybe more importantly, it's which league wants separation. When we said last week that the SEC and the Big Ten are the exact same, you get the same revenue distribution, each one looked at the other and said, well, why don't we get more? We feel like we have more prowess in college athletics. And if by 2028 we can make even more money than the other guy in this race to stay alive that everyone seems to be competing in, let's do it. If we can make the most money of anybody by 2028, if we can make more money, let's do it. So I think the Big Ten is especially, we've seen in their realignment strategy where they've gone way out west and just completely broken all barriers. They want to make money. That's the only reason USC and UCLA and the like have moved into the Big Ten. The SEC has tried to stay regional, but my thing is footprint. Will the SEC grasp at a Clemson, grasp at a Florida State? I still believe, Spencer, in 2009, Clemson had the 48th best football revenue in the country. It's behind Bowling Green. It was a 10-year stretch of winning that made them good. What happens if they're middle of the pack the next 10 years? Then what? Do they fall back down to 48th in the country? I don't think so, but the SEC is at least wondering that. Where does that brand go if they don't win? Is there staying power for Clemson? I'm not sure if the SEC believes in that enough, though they might just believe in Florida State.
Yeah, they could. And, the state of Florida is such a big, there's a television market component, but there's a recruiting component when I think the state of Florida in college football. Like the three biggest recruiting states, Florida, Texas, California, you put them in whatever order you want. But I think the SEC has the chance to just completely dominate the state of Florida. You get a Florida, you get a Florida State, and you could maybe dip your toe in and get Miami. You could probably get Miami on the cheap right now because Miami is, as we talked about here on yesterday's show, probably the next school to make a move, whether that's a lawsuit or investigate, what the exit fee would be to get out of the ACC and everything like that. But I want to get you out of here on a Big 12 note.
Yeah.
Clemson and Florida State, let's say they leave the ACC and just for the sake of argument, go to the SEC. And the rest of the ACC, let's say including Miami, they all stand pat and they're not able to get a power 2 invite. Is it worth it for the Big 12 to go and explore adding, the top targets that we've talked about before that would maybe make the most sense would be Pitt and Louisville if they were able to come up with the money to leave the ACC.
Yeah, Brett Yormark is now on the offensive, and we know that from what he mentioned during these meetings with the college football playoff where they're trying to figure out the revenue distribution. When it was set to the Big 12 would make about half as much as the Big 10 and the SEC, Yormark's response was, wait a second, let's place a look-in clause here so that in a couple of years when everything is shaken out in expansion, we can renege where we put these revenue numbers for each conference. What Yormark wants to do right now is expand to get that revenue bump up. And he's going to do that with teams that are the middle to upper part of the pack. In the
But is
ACC.
that going to expand? If you bring in Louisville and Pitt, does that expand the Big 12's revenue in a significant way?
Louisville, yes. The Pitt, you look at the rivalry and the possible TV market as well. Like I'm walking in a mall the other day in Georgia, and I see Pittsburgh Steelers uniforms, right? You can build a brand out of the city of Pittsburgh. And Louisville itself is a very profitable athletic program when they are winning. And that's the case for a lot of Big 12 and even back in SEC teams. When Ole Miss is winning, they're top 25. When they're not, they are a Big 12 team from a revenue standpoint. So when it's just talking money right here, the Big 12 could take a Louisville, a Pitt, a Miami, the footprint of a UNC of Virginia. That's kind of your wish list right there. And then how does Virginia Tech and NC State, how do those two teams shake out? I think the Big 12 of that pack wants to get to 20. That seems to be the fair cutoff. And then if you're a Syracuse, a Wake Forest, a Boston College, you don't exist anymore.
Yeah, I think UNC and Virginia, just my suspicion, I don't know that those university presidents would go for the Big 12. I think they'd go for the Big 10. Yeah. Otherwise, those schools feel like, to me, because of the academic component with those universities, I don't know if they would go towards the Big 12. And we have seen universities say, no, I'm not going here, or I'm not going there, or I don't want to do this. That's part of the reason that I think you have Calford in the ACC right now, is they looked at the prospect of rebuilding the Pac-12, which, by the way, as I'm going to talk about in the next segment, is certainly on the way because they got a good piece of news recently with all this playoff money and whatnot. But Cal and Stanford, I think, looked at the Pac and said, you're going to rebuild with Boise State and Fresno. We're not affiliated with Boise State and Fresno State. We'd rather affiliate with the SMUs, the Dukes, the North Carolinas, Florida State, and Clemson's of the world. So it's all very It's all very fascinating. It's crazy that we're going to have this
Awesome.
much change before this much change has even taken place. We still haven't seen the 12-team playoff. And we're having all of these moves. Drake Toll, Locked On, Big 12, everything you need for that conference. Go check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Drake, always a fun time.
Dude, I hate this for college athletics. I hate it for college football, but I
Me
do
too.
love the fact that we can go back and forth on all these scenarios. That in itself makes it electric at the very least.
It is great content. It is not great for the sport. That is the important distinction here. But the Pac-12 got a not great, but a good, at least, piece of news as it pertains to the rebuild. We'll talk about that coming up next. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Yukon Huskies are the Nissan Armada. The top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there, so no wonder they've landed the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament and in the East region. The Auburn Tigers are the Nissan Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch this year and created a lane for themselves, claiming the top spot in the SEC and beating Florida in the tournament championship. They're set to make a run. I have them going to the Final Four. And the Oregon Ducks are this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance in the final Pac-12 tournament, as we know it, punching their ticket to the big dance. They say win life, go Rogue. That's what the Ducks have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop at nissanusa.com. That's nissanusa.com. This episode also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, which for some of you will start early Thursday morning. Just prepare yourselves. And FanDuel, you got to recognize, lets you bet money on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's it. $5, you hit. It's a 1/16 seat. Boom, $200 in bonus bets. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. I've got Houston. Who do you like? Put your money where your mouth is with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and official sportsbook here at the Locked On Network. Well, if you're a fan of the Pac-12, listen up because you just got some very good news. So, recently on this very show, things can change very quickly, can't they? I talked about how Oregon State and Washington State getting 1/5 of a group of 5 share, the same as what UConn would get from the college football playoff and the expanded revenue distributions and whatnot, was not ideal, but wasn't actually going to be a critical blow. Because the Pac-12 this year, with 4 teams in the NCAA tournament, well, that's a couple $1 million a unit paid out over the course of several years. All of that money goes to Oregon State and Washington State. So once again, the Beavs and the Cougs are looking at teams like Oregon or Washington State themselves or Arizona or Colorado perhaps, who's got a first 4 game that has already taken place by the time you're listening to or watching the show. They're rooting for those teams because every game they win is money for their war chest to try and rebuild the conference, keep their athletic departments funded at a Power 5 level, and continue to keep their coaching salaries relevant or competitive with the caliber of coach that they want to attract in their various sports, specifically football. So when I talked about that, I meant what I said, that look, this is not ideal. It's not great, but they're going to be able to make this up. They're getting money from the NCAA tournament here. If a team makes a run, that would be great. Just pick up a couple wins and you'll be able to get some money and it'll all be okay. Well, then Oregon State, Washington State got a good piece of news. And somehow, some way, after it appeared to some that Kirk Schultz of Washington State, who's been the most involved, Oregon State's president has kind of taken a back seat to all of this sort of stuff, at least publicly. I'm sure she's involved privately, but publicly, it's been mostly Kirk Schultz up there in Pullman. And Kirk Schultz just increased the amount of money they'll get, at least through 2028, significantly from the college football playoff. By how much? Well, instead of getting 1/5 of $1.8 million, they're getting double $1.8 million each. Now, a full college football playoff revenue share for a power school has been in the $6 million range. So is it at the level that they deserve to get? No, it is not. But you have quintupled and then doubled. What is that? Oh, yes, that's 1 multiplied by 10, whatever that's called. I actually don't know what that term is called. That is the amount of money that they are now getting. So not only are they not making less than the Mountain West teams are going to, or the American Conference teams? No reason why I picked those two conferences and then had a dramatic pause for effect there, or the Sun Belt teams or anybody else. No, they're now going to get double that, which is a sign of almost respect from the College Football Playoff Committee to say, yeah, you guys actually are worthy of getting more than these schools, meaning at least at some level, they agree with the assessment that many of us have, myself included, that these are not Group of Five institutions. These are not schools that deserve to be paid not only at that level, but less than that level, and they're now making more. So for the next several years, the NCAA tournament units that the Pac-12 will pick up because of the 4 teams in this year's tournament are just going to fuel the war chest. And I am once again bringing this up until it comes to fruition. I don't think I even need to speak it into existence because this is just what is lining up more and more. And this is just another step in that direction because you no longer have to pull money from that big $255 million war chest or hope that the lawsuit it results in a very small settlement, if any at all, with the Holiday Bowl or the Comcast overpayments or anything of the sort. You know, the Comcast overpayment, certainly that's an interesting case. But my understanding, last we'd heard about it, is that it's going to be divided up amongst the 10 departing schools because they were the ones who actually had the money go into their athletic departments over the many years in which Comcast was paying too much for the Pac-12 network. So now Oregon State and Washington State can just keep building the war chest and continue to plot like Emperor Palpatine, but in a more benevolent way, though. It may not feel that way to the Mountain West and the American conferences once the move comes to fruition, but you can just continue to plot about, okay, when we no longer have as big of a financial hurdle here as we would have otherwise, but we were planning, we were setting up and prepared to act, getting 330 some odd thousand. Now it's going to be 3.6 million apiece. Well, that's rather significant. So I think that that's really good news for Oregon State, Washington State, what is referred to by their commissioner, Teresa Gould, as the Pac-12. Many of you refer to it as the Pac-2, but one day it'll be a lot closer to the Pac-12. Maybe it'll be the Pac-10. I think the question that they should be looking at right now is not when to act or what specifically to do. They should be asking themselves, what is the right number? What number of teams can we get to? Do we want to get to? And what benefits us to get to? That's the angle that I would approach this if I were the presidents at Oregon State and Washington State. I'd say, okay, what are our options and how do we go about them? Make, as Leslie Knope would, a pros and cons list and understand what's going to take place. But you got to be ready with this stuff because as we've seen with realignment in more than one occasion, it can move very, very quickly. A week ago, they were getting 1/5 of the Group of Five payout. Now they are getting double the Group of Five payout. That's just in a week. That's not a lot of time. And Clemson, Florida State, what happens with those lawsuits, I think is what the Beavs and the Cougs are going to sit here and watch for and wait for and be ready to act on. Because perhaps the ACC, what if Clemson and Florida State leave and let's say they go to the SEC and then Virginia and North Carolina were to decide we want to go to the Big Ten. And we have to take NC State and Virginia Tech with us. So we're going to go. And then you got a bunch of schools hanging out. Maybe Louisville and Pitt wind up in the Big 12, but nobody else. And suddenly Syracuse and Wake Forest and Boston College, they're just kind of just hanging out, trying to have a good time. Duke would probably go with North Carolina, I imagine. But again, if schools are just kind of out there, remember, we've thrown geography to the wind. Cal and Stanford currently, as of 2024, compete in the ACC. Would you welcome them back? Of course you would if you could get them back. But you have to let all that stuff play out. So that's out of their control, but kind of in a good way. Because whatever happens will give a clearer picture of how they can act in a leveraged capacity to try and set themselves up to create the premier group of 5 conference whose league champion would almost assuredly get into the college football playoff every year. Maybe not every single year, but far more years than not. I think in a 5-year span, a league that's got the best of the Mountain West, the best of the American, Oregon State and Washington State, that conference champion can have 2 losses and probably get into the playoff. There is a real possibility that that happens. Heck, last year, SMU was 11-2. They almost got in, but you had an undefeated Liberty team. Well, that's not super common going undefeated in any conference anywhere. If there had been just 1 loss on Liberty's resume, 11-2 SMU in the American would have been into the New Year's Six. And if it had been the 12-team playoff, they would have been in the 12-team playoff. And so if you build that conference that has the best of the American, the best of the Mountain West, plus Oregon State and Washington State, I think you can have a 2-loss conference champion that ends up getting in. That's what you're trying to build. Is the right number 8? Is the right number 10? It has to be at least 8 by the NCAA bylaws. Is it 8? Is it 10? Is it 12? Is it a full merger with the Mountain West? I think probably not if you're building the conference that I envision, but how much control do I have over these things, really? I don't have any control over the transfer portal. Oh, boy. Did you hear who might be entering the transfer portal here momentarily? Well, if you haven't, you should. You should also know about Amazon Fire TV because Amazon Fire TV is your destination for sports. From live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball, right around the corner, the college basketball tournament, literally here as you're listening to or watching this show, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. You've got all the analysis, game highlights, and more to keep up to date on the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, Major League Baseball, and more. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. When Kalen DeBoer first showed up at Alabama, one of the biggest questions asked about him, I think fairly, by those in Tuscaloosa or beyond, given his track record and where he was coming from geographically, was how is he going to be able to recruit? What's it going to look like? Can he stay at the same level? And I think a reasonable response was, well, you can't expect him to be at the Nick Saban level. You can have as much success as you want. You're not Nick Saban. At least not yet. Until you win half a dozen national championships, you're not Nick Saban. It is different when you're talking to a recruit and his parents, and you are sitting there with 6 national championship trophies to your name. So you're never going to bring that level of recruiting to Alabama. I just don't see that taking place. But this is also the transfer portal era, and Kalen DeBoer, oh boy, he might be getting a big name here. Do you remember when Kalen DeBoer lost 2 guys from his coaching staff? I do, because I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan. And Coach Huff and Coach Grubb are currently on Mike Macdonald's staff in Seattle. I'm very happy about that, if you cannot tell. For those listening on podcast, I gave a little fist bump in the air and just gave another one because I like those guys. I think they're really good coaches. So when you look at that track record and what they have done, what they have had to do rather on their coaching staff, moving Nick Sheridan to the offensive coordinator position, would you expect that Kadyn Proctor is thinking about transferring to Alabama? Report came down from On3 Sports, and Josh Pate tweeted this out as well, that when the spring transfer portal window opens, Kadyn Proctor is expected to transfer back to Alabama. Remember, there are no rules against a 2-time transfer, and I believe there was a lawsuit that might still be percolating throughout the courts about there being any restrictions on players entering the transfer portal, which I'll go on record by saying I don't think is an equitable arrangement between the university and specifically the coaching staff and the players. I don't think, barring a departure of the coaching staff, that's a great arrangement. I think that is putting way too much stress on the coaches and the program and whatnot, because players are just free agents every year. There's no sport. There's no professional sport. You talk about the professionalization of college sports. It's just becoming pro sports. Well, guess what you can't do in professional sports? Just leave whenever you want. You're obligated to show up. You're not a free agent after every year. No one signs a 1-year deal all the time. Sometimes they do, but there's a contract and everyone knows it's a 1-year deal. And so, these guys might say, oh, I'm coming here for college and all this sort of, and then they might bounce after a year for various reasons. But anyway, I digress. Kadyn Proctor was the number 1 offensive tackle in the country from the state of Iowa. Went to Alabama, started last year on Bama's offensive line that went to, need I remind you, the college football playoff semifinal, won the SEC. After the year, he was a transfer portal departure, decided to go back to his home state. I'm going to go back and be a Hawkeye. And of course, somebody like that fits in the Big Ten. How could he not? They're about running the football, physicality, winning in the trenches. And now the reports are that he's going to transfer back to Alabama. I can't think of a scenario with a player off the top of my head in which someone, and not just someone, the most highly coveted class of 2023 offensive tackle goes to a school, starts every game, goes to the playoff on that team, transfers, and before he plays at that new school decides, I'm going to take this second transfer portal window and go back to the school that I originally left. Now, this hasn't happened yet. This is just reported. And Josh Pate tweeted out something that's even crazier, which is that Kadyn Proctor going back to Alabama isn't even in the top 3 craziest transfer portal stories that he has heard so far. Excuse me? Excuse me. Josh Pate does as good a job as anybody, I think, covering college football, talking about the sport. He's a very well-sourced individual. He's not tweeting that out to rile people up. He's not tweeting that with clickbait. If he's saying something, it's because he is hearing it from people who are in the know. But this entire concept of a transfer to go back to the school he came from before he ever even got going in spring football in a significant way, before he ever even took a snap for the team that he transferred to, is absolute. Don't make this something that your eyes gloss over on Twitter. This is bonkers. That's absolutely bonkers. And I think that it is a testament to what Kalen DeBoer clearly is doing. You wonder whether he's going to prioritize acquiring high-level talent. Well, here you go, Alabama fans. If he's able to pull this off, it would arguably be a better recruiting victory than getting Ryan Williams, a 5-star plus wide receiver who decommitted and DeBoer got to recommit. That scarlet A in crimson means something to people, and Kalen DeBoer is reminding everybody about what he has done as a college football coach at a place that has certainly reached the heights of college football, had made the playoff once before in the 4-team era, and DeBoer did it. They'd never played for a national championship game. They've got national championships that they claim up there in Seattle from way back when, because with Don James, they were at that sort of level. They have a co-national championship with the Miami Hurricanes in 1991. That sounds right. Anyway, Husky fans might blast me for that, but pretty sure it's 1991. Washington had never been to a national championship game before. Had you had that system or any system like it back in 91, yep, Washington would have been there. Absolutely. But in the modern era, they had not reached the game, and DeBoer brought them there. And I think people are starting to realize how good of a coach he is. And he is starting to understand what sort of recruiting power he's got with that Alabama head coach moniker, with that label saying, I'm the head coach of the University of Alabama. And if he pulls this off, it is a feather in his cap. It's an important roster piece for 2024 because they had departures along the offensive line, but Proctor was one of them. And if you get that guy back and re-plug him into an offensive line that's got Parker Brailsford at center, and a number of other good pieces, suddenly Jalen Milroe could have a really good running game. He could have time to throw the football. And I think there are some questions that are fair about the Alabama receiving corps. Talked about that earlier this week with Luke Robinson of Locked On Alabama. But I think that for the Crimson Tide to be in this position right now is starting to answer the question, how's Kalen DeBoer going to recruit? Well, you can talk about his high school recruiting and say, well, it won't be as good as Nick Saban. But he clearly understands how to use the transfer portal if he is able to pull this off. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.